Hi everybody, my name is Rachel Keski, and I am an oboe player at Iowa State University and also a member of the Metalladera Woodwind Quintet. I started playing oboe way back in 5th grade, and I started on oboe. I didn't start with a different instrument. I was lucky enough to pick it and start with it from the get-go, which isn't always the case for a lot of students. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about how to go about making an oboe reed. It's not quite the same as like saxophone and clarinet, where you can buy some store-bought reeds and they're going to work out just great for you. Oboe reeds and bassoon reeds, they're a bit more finicky. So once you get to a certain level of playing, a lot of those musicians will make their own reeds. So, this is what my reed case looks like right now. I have my current reeds, which for me consists of the one I like best right now, the one I liked best a couple of weeks ago, and some other ones that are pretty good or might just need a little bit of scraping. And I also have a couple of English horn reeds here as well. So, first thing we need in order to make reeds is, of course, cane. Now, all cane, like any sort of cane, oboe cane, bassoon cane, saxophone, and clarinet, it all comes from this one plant called the Arundodonax, and it kind of looks like bamboo. And depending on how much they let it grow and how big the diameter of it gets, those different pieces of cane will get used for the different instruments. So the skinniest diameter is what we'll use for oboe cane, and then the thickest one gets used for saxophone reeds because those are the biggest. Now, I don't have any tube cane to show. And it's a really long process to get it down. But a shaped piece of cane is going to look something like this. We have it tapered in and folded over. We have two sides because it's a double reed. Some of the other tools I'm going to need are some staples. This is a little piece of metal with some cork wrapped around it. Now on finished reeds, we don't ever see the metal part because it's covered up by cane and thread. But if you were to ever smash a reed, it would look like this. And once I've decided that I no longer like a reed, I'll just break off the cane and take off the thread, and I can reuse these as much as I want, pretty much until the cork falls apart. I'm also going to want my mandrel. We use this when we tie on reeds, so the staple will slide on just like that, and I'll have a better grip on it for when I'm tying on reeds. I will need my chopping block for when it's time to cut the reed open, because if you see with this piece of shaped cane, we'll end up folding it over like this, but right now it's closed at the top. So later on, we'll end up cutting off the very top with a razor blade. And that'll give us the opening through which we'll blow the air through to play. I'm also going to need my plaque and scraping knife for when we go to actually scrape on the reed. This will go in that little opening that we'll create when we clip the tip, just to make sure we're not hurting the other side of the reed when we're working on a particular side. And with the knife, you got to be careful with your knife because we need it super, super, super sharp to be able to scrape just tiny amounts of cane off when we're making the reeds. You're also gonna need thread. If you go a little bit crazy like me and you just like to have a bunch of fun colors, you'll have a bunch of spools, but really just one is fine. Like on this one, I have variegated thread. So the reed ends up looking multicolored once it's all tied on. The very first thing we're going to need to do when we go to tie on a reed is we need to soak some of our cane in water. So I have a couple pieces just hanging out in this cup of water. A lot of times I'll use a small Tupperware container, but I had a cup nearby and it does the trick. Usually you'll want your cane to soak for bare minimum 10 minutes, but 15 to 20 is usually pretty good. This makes it so the cane is going to be pliable enough to handle me using a lot of pressure on it when I'm tying it on with thread. Because if it's too dry, it might crack, which sometimes isn't the end of the world, but usually isn't very good. The next thing we're going to do is we will tie our thread to a secure base. So good ones to do that on are a music stand or a table leg or a chair leg, but I have my handy dandy music stand here, which will work just fine. I usually do knots in 3s. Tends to work pretty well. And then I'm going to wind my thread back up a bit. Kind of rest it on the table for now. I'll grab my staple that I want to use and slip it onto the mandrel. You know it's a good fit when the very tip of the mandrel comes flush with the opening on the staple. Mandrel will staple on it. I have my soaked piece of cane. When I fold it over the top, I want the blades of the reed to be slipped. The one facing you on top is going to go a little bit to the right, and the one behind a little bit to the left. This is because when we are winding the thread on, that motion is going to be opposite of the way we're slipping it. So I'm pinching the blades on the staple with my left hand. This is the right-handed way of tying on reeds. If you're left-handed, I'm sorry, it'll be the exact opposite of what I'm doing. But from the bottom of the cork on my staple to the tip of the reed, I'm going to measure. I like my reeds to be a little bit longer, so I'm going to measure 73.5 millimeters. I'm scooching this cane up and down until I get it exactly where I want it. I got it just about right. So, keeping that in place, I'm going to grab my thread with my right hand and starting from below the reed, I'm going to wrap over the top, and this is in a right to left is the way we're tying on. So I did one loop, and from here, first of all, the tension is super tight between my reed and my stand, and also the reed and my winding thread. I want a good amount of pressure so this cane doesn't slip off if I'm not directly holding on to it. So from here, I want to make sure that my cane is lined up with the flat part of my mandrel, so we're not crooked. I want to make sure that those blades are still slipped. And I want to make sure that I haven't messed with the overall length. So I'm going to check that measurement again. I'm still at 73.5 millimeters, so that's good. And the other thing I want to do is check the gap in the opening on the sides and make them about even. So on this side, it's all the way closed, and this side I have a bit of an opening. So I'm going to kind of scooch the cane over just a little bit so both sides have a slight opening. Okay. Now, from there, I'm going to wrap a couple more times, making sure I don't have any gaps in the thread. And then from the bottom of the staple to the top of where my thread is going to end up being 47 millimeters, because that is the overall length of each of these staples. So we're going to wind until we get to the very top of where the metal is. But we have to measure because we can't see it when the cane's on it. So I'm going to measure. I'm at 46 millimeters right now, so I'm going to wrap 2 more times. And now I'm good. So from here, I'm going to take my working thread and wrap it over this bit that I've already wrapped on. So I'm crossing over, but I'm still wrapping left to right. So I'm going over, but I'm still staying on top of this yarn behind. It's going to end up getting wrapped down. So I'm going over, but I'm still above this yarn. And then I'm going to keep working my way down the reed. I'll push up the thread with my thumbnail just to make sure there's no gaps. So when I get down to where the cork is, but I have a little bit of a gap, that's where I'm gonna tie off this thread. This part, some people can do with both their hands, but I make use of my legs since I only have 2 hands. I'll hold the mandrel between 2 of my legs, and I'll take this working thread with 2 of my fingers, twist it so flip upside down, so this working yarn makes a loop, and I'll bring it down and tie a knot at the base of that thread there. And I'll do this 3 times, making sure that knot is nice and tight. Okay, and then with either your knife or your razor blade, we'll trim off the thread there, and we can trim off the thread from where we had it tethered. And that is how you tie on a reed. So I have my tied on reed. I want to double check that I don't have any gaps in the thread or at the very bottom below the thread. If there's any holes, then your reed might leak, and we don't want that to play on, but we can put some plumber's tape or fish skin on it to try to seal that leak if it's low enough, and you'll still be able to play on the reed part of the reed. Now from here, we want to soak our reed a bit more. I have had this contraption for years and years, but it is a little film canister that I've put a piece of Velcro on, and I put the other part on a hair clip. This is my soaking cup for my reeds. So we'll soak that for a couple minutes, and then we'll move on to scraping the reed. So the type of scrape I'm going to be showing you is called an American scrape. And I'm just going to really quickly draw a diagram. This is also something that you can quickly Google as well. Okay, so that's our reed shape. After you have clipped open your reed, you want your overall length to be somewhere between 70 and 72 millimeters. Like I said when we were tying on, this length from the bottom of the cork to the thread is going to be 47 millimeters. Now, for where we're scraping in this cane area, we're going to give it a specific shape, and this is what people have found vibrates well for them. A lot of things come down to a matter of the sort of tone you want out of your reed, how much it projects. Everything you do when we're scraping it is gonna affect all of those little things when we play. So this middle section right here is called the heart, and the top is going to be 66 millimeters from the bottom, and the bottom of it will be at 61 millimeters. Below the heart, we're going to keep this thick area called the spine. And we're going to have this thinner area on either side of it, which you can either call the back or the channels. And then this whole section up here is the tip. And that's going to be the very thinnest part of the reed, especially this section here at the very, very edge and on the sides of it. So your spine is going to be really thick. You're going to have bark at the bottom that's really thick. Bark is what we call the shiny part of the reed that we haven't like scraped off of yet. Your heart is gonna stay pretty thick. And then your channels will get a bit thinner as you scrape up. And the tip, like I said, will be the thinnest. So, I've had this reed in my reed cup for maybe 10-15 minutes, just to soften up the cane so it'll be easier to scrape off of. So, like I said, my heart is going to be between 61 and 66 millimeters. And I am actually going to mark that on the cane itself with a pencil so I know where not to scrape with my knife. So I'm just going to make a little nick on the side with my pencil. Just a little mark. I'm going to do that on both sides. Like that. Alright, and then I can get into scraping. So like I said before, I'm right-handed, so this is a right-handed knife. It would be sharpened the other way if you were left-handed. With my knife, I am going to find that pencil mark that I just made at 66 millimeters. Put my knife right there, and then it's going to be the bottom part of my 45-degree angle. And from there, I'm going to scrape outwards, making sure I keep that 45-degree angle as much as I can. Now, some people will count their scrapes here. I don't do that so much, but some people might. You could say to start off maybe about 30 scrapes. And I'm starting from this 66 millimeter point every single time and scraping outward through to the edge with this kind of pivoting motion. And then for the left side, I'm going to angle my hand and my reed, my hand and my knife the other way. Find that 66 millimeter mark and do the same thing. All right. So from that, we can see that I have an inverted V shape here on my reed. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. So I have an inverted V on both sides now. Another thing that oboists do is they will hold their reeds up to a light source to be able to see through it and check how even they've scraped. On this reed, I can see that over here, I've been a little bit more heavy-handed than on this side. And I can see that the same thing is true when I look through on the other side of the reed. And that this middle part is a little bit thicker than the edges, which is fine for now. Next up, we are going to start scraping through the back or the channels, starting from a couple of millimeters from where that thread starts. That's going to be where I start scraping. And I want to stop before I hit this little 61 millimeter mark. And from here, if you were to count scrapes, I would say 7 or 8 is what I would start with. And then same thing as before, I want to do a fluid pivoting motion with my wrist. So, if you can see here, I've scraped 2 channels out, and I have left this thick spine right in the middle. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm going to really quick fix where I saw it was uneven when I held it up to the light. And now that this tip is getting pretty thin, I am going to clip open the top of it with my razor blade. So I'll line up the opening somewhere in the middle-ish of my chopping block and take off just the very, very edge of it. Not much at all. So this is how much clipped off. Barely anything. Now I have a reed that's opened up, but it's still nowhere near being ready to play. If I play on it, it might make a sound, but it will be super, super, super hard to play on. Yeah, way too hard. I'm going to get my plaque now. I'm going to put it in the opening of the reed so I don't damage the other side when I'm working. So, on my reed, in the heart, even though I want to keep it thicker than the other parts of the reed, I still want to remove this shiny bark from it. So I'm going to quickly just scrape very gently over it. And the reason I'm scraping backwards right now is I had a little bit of a catch right here, and I don't want to make it worse. And then, even more carefully, I'm going to get rid of the bark that was hanging out on the spine. It's okay that there's bark at the very bottom and on the sides, though. That's okay. Okay. From here, I'm going to keep scraping through the tip to make it even thinner. Oh, but really quick, I'll hold this reed up to the light so you can see how it looks with the channels. So, when I hold the reed up to the light, you can see just how thin it is in the tip. It's a bit lighter through where I scraped in the channels in the back. You can see that it's pretty dark in the spine and just a little bit less dark in the heart. And same on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to just keep scraping through the tip to get it even thinner. You can hear my knife kind of clicking against the plaque. You'll know that you got it thin enough when it's not making that noise anymore. So one thing I like is a more mellow and blended sound. Because I want to try to blend a little bit more, I'm going to make a more blended reed. So some people will have a very, very, very strict inverted V, but I'm going to take the time to make sure this is smooth and blended, and I will blend a bit through from the back to the tip. That's the sort of style of reed that I like, but other people may like very, very distinct sections of their reed. I will keep repeating the process of scraping and holding my reed up to a light to check how even the scrape is and how thin I've made it. When it comes to oboe reeds, they are so finicky. It doesn't hurt to just be a little extra careful with it. I'm not using too much pressure with my knife, because you might do what I did just there and nick off a little bit of a corner. It's not the end of the world, but we want to try to avoid it if we can. I want both the left and the right sides of each blade of the reed to be even, and I want the front and the back of the reed to have the same thickness as well. I got the tip pretty thin, so I'm going to go ahead and test it out to see where we're playing at. So I'm going to do something which is called crowing the reed. It's where instead of my lips being about here on the reed, I'm going to go all the way down to the thread. And that's going to be what's called a crow. And I want it to read as a C. So it's a little bit of a flat C, but that's usually not too bad. You can hear a little bit of overtones in the reed, which is good, but I usually like a little bit more. But I'm going to go ahead and quick play on the reed just to see how it's sounding. So I'm going to quick play on the reed a little bit. I don't expect it to sound amazing, but it's playable right now. What I'm listening for is going to be intonation. If I like the timbre of the reed, how easy or hard is it to play on? You know, every single oboist is going to have a different preference for how easy or hard you like a reed. But when you make your own, you can get it to that sweet spot in the middle that has enough resistance that you're able to push on the reed a little bit, but it's not too hard to play on, where it'll be too tiring after a while if you have a long rehearsal. So, just gonna quick play. So, the reed is stuffy, it doesn't respond well, it's hard to play on, so that means I need to keep scraping. So the more cane that we end up taking out of the reed, that will end up lowering its pitch. But if it ever gets too low, if we clip the tip and shorten the length of the reed a little bit, it ends up raising the pitch. So if you're someone who likes music and you also like physics, you could ask your teacher about that. So, because I didn't like that it was stuffy and it was not very resonant, I want to scrape more through the back to kind of loosen up those vibrations. And I'm going to blend into the heart just a little bit. Not too much. I'm just going to scrape a bit more in the tip. I'm going to focus on the very edge of it and the sides just a little bit more because I want those to be extra thin. Okay. So I'm going to check the crow again. I am expecting it to be flat, somewhere in the B natural range. And if that's the case, I'll end up clipping the tip and checking the crow again. So it's at a B. And I'm going to clip just a tiny amount to bring up the pitch. So just a very small amount. And then I'll check the crow again. So it's jumping back and forth a little bit. So that tells me either the cane is a little bit warped, either from the way it was shaped or from the way that I scraped it. So I'm going to hold it up to the light again and see if I can find anywhere that it's uneven. So I can see on this side, on the right, it's a little bit thicker than the others. So I'm going to scrape there. Just a couple times. And check my crow again. So it's a little bit low. I am going to do another tiny clip. And it's really just the smallest amount of cane that I'm taking off. I don't even think you can see it in my hand. This right here is how much I clipped off each time. This was my initial one. But when I'm trying to bring the pitch up, it's just a tiny sliver. Okay. So that's closer to a C. So I'm going to try to play on it again. Again, I'm checking for pitch. I'm checking for how easy is it to play, and do I like the sound of it? So, it's a little bit flat, and while it sounds okay, it sounds muffled, and I want to actually scrape through the heart a little bit to loosen up some of those vibrations and get what's going to make more of an oboe sound. Same dealio. Plaque in, and I'm gonna scrape through the heart and the back a little bit. That muffled sound to me means that my reed isn't vibrating enough. So I'm making a very blended but gentle scrape from the back through the heart and into the tip a little bit. And that really is my personal preference. If you are taking private lessons and your oboe teacher says don't do that, it's okay. Listen to them. This is one of many, many, many ways that you can make reeds. This is a mix of a few ways that I've learned how to make reeds and kind of tricks that I've learned that have worked well for me. Check the crow. Sitting low. So we're going to clip. Check again. Clip one more time. It's always better to clip more than once if you have to, rather than do a really big clip and overdo it. Because you can always take off more cane, but you can't put it back on. So, closer to a C. And just for fun, I'm going to check the overall length. Right now, I am exactly at 72 millimeters. Which, if you remember before, I said that I want my overall length to be somewhere between 70 and 72 millimeters. And I usually like my reeds a little bit longer, so hanging out at 72 is not too bad. So you'll notice once you get to this stage in making a reed, it's a lot of scraping, crowing, and playing on the reed, and repeating, doing it over and over again until you are satisfied with the sound that you have. And unfortunately, not every reed ends up turning out the way you want it to. I would say about 2 out of every 3 reeds I end up liking enough to want to play on, like at rehearsals or concerts, and that's a pretty good percentage. Younger players might make 5 and only find one that they really, really like. The others might be playable, but they might not end up being perfect, unfortunately. So, I'm going to play on this one again. So, I don't hate where the reed is at, but at this point, I am suspecting that the particular shape of reed that I bought is what's making this one sound as mellow as it is, not vibrating very much. So, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch the sides just a little bit to make the opening bigger. And I'm going to let it soak for a minute and then come back. Okay, so I just scraped a little bit more on this. It's a lot of the same thing, so I don't have to film all of it. Gonna go ahead and test it again. It's still just not responding as freely as I want it to. If I'm not blowing enough air through it, the sound just cuts off. One thing I want to check is I can see that the sides are sealing pretty well, but I'm going to check it just in case there's something that's leaking that I can't see. So, since I can hear the little popping noise, that means it's sealing okay, and there isn't air leaking anywhere out of the sides of the reed. Time to keep scraping. So right now, the part that I am scraping is more through the tip. I didn't think my response was articulate enough. So that is a time when I'll scrape more in the tip. And when I thought my sound was more fuzzy and muffled, that was something that I scraped more out of the back. And these are honestly just things you learn. The more you do it, the more you scrape reeds. Not every single one is gonna end up working. And hopefully this one does for me, but there's a chance it might not. Even if I don't do anything majorly wrong, sometimes the cane is just weird. And it doesn't end up working out. And that's honestly one of the biggest struggles of playing oboe. First of all, you're making your own reeds, but then not even all of them end up working. So, I'm gonna hold it up to the light. fix what I see. Right now I can see that I'm losing some of the definition in my inverted V shape. It's become flatter. I don't mind it being rounded, but it's kind of flat right now. So I'm going to go back in and angle my knife a little bit more to give that more definition. Hold up to the light again. Check my crow. So now, I'm really buzzy, but that's more of the sound that I wanted, even though it's super flat. So I'm going to go ahead and clip. Check my crow again. Still flat. So when I'm checking the crow, I'm still rolling my lips in with, you know, a good oboe embouchure, but it's going all the way to the thread. So on that one, you could hear some more overtones in that crow, which is good. I want that. More overtones gives an oboe reed that quality to project more and cut through the sound, even if you're not playing super loud. That's why you only have a couple oboes versus however many, you know, other musicians might be in a section. So, I think I'm at a point where I like the reed. I'm gonna play an A just to check my tuning. Good. Got a good A. It's at a point right now where it responds easily, whether I'm doing a breath attack or a tongue attack. It is vibrating more. I don't have that muffled sound. It feels like it can handle changes in dynamics better. It can. And so me noodling around on a reed is just ways that oboists will check these different things on little mental checklists, like I was saying. My pitch, my intonation, dynamics, just how I personally like my reeds to sound. But the real test is when you actually go to play a piece of music, because noodling around and playing something, sometimes they sound a little bit different. And once you go to actually play on something, you might decide, hey, this reed still is a little bit hard to play on. Maybe I'll scrape at the very tip a little bit more. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to check right now. didn't notice anything that I didn't notice before, and I think I have a new reed to stick in my ready-to-go case. So, that was tying on and scraping an oboe reed.